Well, thank you for braving the weather and getting out in the slushy snow, whatever it is, slushy something, I don't know, whatever it is, slushy rain, whatever it is. Really glad to have you here. And if this is your first time joining us, my name is Wendy Lyons Crosstech, and I'm one of the pastors here. And it's just such a joy to be with all of you. And we are concluding a 3-week, what was a 4-week, but today is this. Now we made some adjustments. It's a 3-week study called New Year, New You. I'm just going to give you just a quick announcement. So there are name tags in the black notebooks that you received at your tables, and Yolanda was hanging out in the back. If you don't have one of those, raise your hand. I think everybody's got one. So there are sheets for you to make notes. I know sometimes I like to make notes, then I feel like I can think better when I'm making notes. Sign in, meet a new friend, and connect with somebody. And as we begin our time together, I'd like to open us up in a word of prayer. So let us pray. God, we give you thanks for the opportunity to gather together today, for the commitment that we are making to our lives, that we are saying we want to make changes, we want to do things differently in the new year, and we are grateful for the opportunity and the insight that we will have today and the chances that we may have to do things new and different. Open us up to connect with you and to connect those with whom we are sitting. All this we pray in Christ's name. Amen. All right, so I'm just going to kind of quickly walk through. So again, what we've been talking about, we're kind of like 4 major areas. So the first week we talked about work, and again, work is their satisfaction with the way that we live our lives and what we do in the world. Love is about the relationships that we have. So it's all sorts of relationships, whether it's family relationships, friends, coworkers, whomever that might be. Play is just that, saying like, how do we have fun? Like I think sometimes we take ourselves too seriously, and so just the reminder to like play and have fun. And if you missed one of those sessions or 2 of those sessions, if you go to YouTube and search for Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, we have our very own YouTube channel, so you can watch the ones that you missed, or if you think that might be helpful for someone else, you can pass those along. And today, we're going to be talking about health. Now, when we think about health, one of the things we've been doing kind of each time is saying, okay, how's it going? Sort of rating it from 0 to full. And when we think about health, I want us to not just, I think we automatically say, okay, my body, my physical body. If I went to the doctor, how are my numbers? Do I have good sugar? Do I have bad cholesterol? Do I have whatever? All those sorts of things. And some of that is, our health is related to, how our physical health is, but it's so much bigger than that. So I want you to think about your physical health, your emotional health, your spiritual health, just kind of your overall well-being. And then I'm going to invite you, just give you just a quick minute to analyze that, and then I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to kind of discuss it at your table. But I'll give you about 30 seconds to say, how's it going for me right now? All right, so the next question is this: what helps me each day to feel well physically, emotionally, and spiritually? So take some time. I'm going to give you guys about 3 minutes to answer that question and then talk amongst yourselves. And James in the back is awesome. He should be putting up a little timer in a little bit. But think about this. Really, it could be something really simple. It could be getting enough sleep. It could be having time to spend with friends. It could be going for a walk, whatever it might be. So what are some of those things, at least one in each of those categories, that you think or really do help you to feel well? And then discuss them around the table, because you may find that somebody else has the same answers, or maybe has something totally different that you can learn from. So we'll give you 3 minutes, and then I'll gather you back together. Well, I know we have a small group, and maybe not everybody can hear, but if anyone's brave, anything that you would like to share, since we have a small group today? Anybody have anything? Anybody? Prayer, spending time in prayer, absolutely. Structure, oh, I like that. I'm a planner. Structure does make me feel good. Anybody else? Exercise, yeah. Do you have any particular exercise that for you, just running? All right. As I was thinking about things, one of the things that just sort of came out at me emotionally was that I didn't have something that I wanted to say that I hadn't gotten a chance to. If that makes sense. So if I had like like if there was a conversation I really wanted to have, good or bad, or something on my kind of list that I wanted to do, if I had had the conversation, I felt just sort of like emotion, like I didn't have to carry around the thoughts in my head. I don't know about you, but I tend to have conversations with people in my brain before I have conversations with them. And so it just sort of like being able to clear my mind, that's a really helpful thing. So we'll talk more deeply into this, but what I want us to really recognize is that our physical, emotional, and our spiritual well-being are all really wrapped up in one another. And so I'm going to kind of try and like divide them out a little bit, but you'll see that there are so many other pieces that kind of, they're just intertwined so much that it's really hard to kind of distinguish them. So I wanted to start first with emotional health. And so I wanted us to think about, when we think about emotional health, there are lots of things that we can consider, but I thought we would start kind of with our thoughts. And this is a chance for you to just kind of maybe just jot some things down. So what kind of thoughts do you find yourself thinking? So I do want you to kind of jot this down right now. So thinking about, do you have racing thoughts about, like I mentioned before, if there's something a conversation I need to have and I haven't had it yet, those thoughts are kind of running through my mind. Is it things that you have to do? Or is it worries or fears? Or what kind of thoughts do you find kind of juggling around in your mind? And the second question is, how do these thoughts serve you and others? Now, this has always been for me, when I think about this, it's an important thing for me to kind of really think about, is it serving me well? Like I make a lot of to-do lists because I know if I don't, then there are things that I will forget, and the thoughts are going to kind of be clouding in my head. Are thoughts serving other people? Are there negative thoughts that I have kind of going in and through my mind, sort of tapes that I'm playing that are not helpful? And then the last question, I want you to I'll give you 30 seconds to talk at your tables. What choice do you have over what you think? And do you think you have a choice over what you think? So turn to somebody next to you and tell them what you think the answer to that is. So in general, do you think that you have a choice over what you think? Yeah? Sometimes I do think so I think yes. But I do think that part of what I think we need to recognize also is that the stimulus that we have around us really affects our thinking without even realizing it, too. So we may have our choice may be to put ourselves in a place where we are interacting with things that are going to affect our thinking in a positive way. So, for instance, if you watch a really scary movie at night, you may be really scared. So you still have an option over what you're thinking, but because of what you've sort of put into the purview of your mind, and by watching a scary movie, you might be creeped out a little bit. So, but just kind of thinking about how do I really work through my thoughts? Now, I want us to talk a little bit about self-compassion. And this is something you may hear people talk about self-care. And and when you think about health, that's a really important thing. But when we talk about self-compassion, it's a much sort of larger, broader, I think more powerful thing for us to consider. When we think about compassion towards other people, we care for them. We love them. We sort of get in the midst of whatever challenges and whatever things they may be going through, and we want to really support them and help care for them. And self-compassion is saying, how can I do those things for myself? So there are three major things to think about when we imagine what it means to be compassionate with ourselves. And I don't know exactly kind of what age it is that things change, but a 2-year-old spills their milk and they just spill their milk. It's like whatever. A 6-year-old spills their milk and they feel bad about it. Like, I spilled my milk, oh no, am I going to get in trouble? Am I bad? Am I all these things? Like there's something within us at some point in time that kind of makes ourselves critical. So I have a 4-year-old, little Freddie, and he was playing soccer, and he gets a little rough sometimes, and he accidentally pushed a girl down, and he is the most sensitive little boy ever, and he was crying. He was so sad that he knocked her down, and we were talking about it because he just had a hard time, because he felt so bad that he had knocked her down accidentally. And afterwards, the next day, I said, "Oh, Freddie, did you feel bad when you accidentally hit the girl or pushed her down?" And he said, "I'm not bad." And he started crying. And my vocabulary was like, did you feel sad? Is what I meant to say, but he heard me say, did you feel bad? He thought, I'm not bad. I'm a good boy. And I thought, oh gosh, like, yes, you're right. You're a good boy. You're not a bad boy. And I think sometimes we say those things to ourselves. Like, I feel bad, therefore I am bad. And that's not really who we are. So the first sort of step of mindful awareness of self-compassion is being mindful of what our thinking is. Um, and one of the ways that we can do this is simply by being curious. What am I thinking right now? What are the thoughts going through my mind, and why am I feeling that way? If you have ever, sort of found yourself in a situation that you felt stressed, or you were around somebody that you were trying to impress, I don't know about you, but like I tend to overthink things when I'm trying to impress somebody. Or, I just kind of like go through lots of emotions, like what is making me feel this way and why? And you don't have to, like beat yourself up about the thoughts you have, but just say, how can I be curious about this? The second part that's important about self-compassion is this idea that we are a part of a shared humanity. So a friend of mine said, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And how do we see ourselves as those who are deeply connected with God? Excuse me. That we are deeply connected with God, but not just that, we are connected with other people. And one of the most important things that I think when we're talking about self-compassion is the idea that we are not the only ones. We are not the only ones who've ever done something and made a big mistake. I remember Gretchen Rubin, who's from Kansas City, and she's written a couple books. Probably the one most familiar is The Happiness Project. And she shares this story about how one day she and her husband and several other people were on an email chain, and a friend of theirs replied when they thought they were replying just to one person, they replied to all and said something maybe they shouldn't have. We've all sort of, been there. And she said, my husband said the thing that made the most sense, and in that moment I thought, yes. And he didn't reply, he didn't like say, oh, it's not a big deal, because he knew that it was a big deal and all these things. And he said, we've all been there. We've all done it. And if we allow ourselves to say, you know what, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to make a mistake. And rather than beat myself up about it, I can say, I'm a part of humanity. We all make mistakes. We all mess up. And that means that it's okay to. Like, I'm not the only one who has ever felt this way. I am not alone. It's a part of what it means to be human. The last is the ability to give hope. And so you imagine, like, how can I really receive comfort? So how can I comfort myself? What is it that I need? How do I be able to find a way that that I can say, okay, I need to give myself hope. Like, I need to know I'm going to get past whatever this challenge is, that I'm going to be okay on the other side of this, that I have hope that there's something that I can't see. So when we talk about, I think in one of the first weeks I talked about what faith is. And faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So when we hope for something, we don't always know what it's going to look like, but we're holding out knowing that there's something out there for us. And so self-compassion is this sense of saying, okay, like, I'm having a hard time right now, but I know that I'm going to make it through this. I know I'm going to make it on the other side, and sort of reframing like how we imagine things. One of the things when you think about self-compassion is to say, if I was a friend, if I was talking to my friend who was struggling with this, what would I say to them? What would I say to them? How would I interact with them if they were struggling with something? And how might I begin to say those things to myself? So I'm going to have us ask, just as we kind of dive a little bit into self-compassion, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to ask some questions around your tables. And these are kind of really sort of centered around this. So how would I like to feel today? And what's one small step that I can take to cultivate the feeling? What's one healthy thing that I can do to support myself when I'm sad or stressed out? And what's one kind statement I feel comfortable saying to myself when I need support? Okay, so 5 minutes, and I want you to share at your tables as well, and just kind of talk about what are these things that you can do to offer self-compassion that's going to help lift you up rather than push you down. All right? Well, hopefully there were a few things that I find every time I do these questions, I find that I there's something that I hadn't really thought about before that kind of comes up. And especially even in conversation, there are things that I can work through and process through and say, okay, what would I do in the midst of that? And when I'll share with you my kind statement, because I'm not like you're a really great person, like I think about the movie The Help. Did you guys ever watch that movie? And this dear woman who's nanny watching this girl says, you're kind, you are smart, and I can't remember all the, and you're important, So I feel lame saying that to myself. But it's great if you can. I just know that I have a hard time doing it, so I can't do it with a feeling comfortable. But the thing that I wrote down is something that I've kind of been thinking about too over the past couple months, and that is, you don't have to try so hard. And that for me is like, okay, like I don't have to try so hard. I don't have to be so perfect. I don't have to do it all right. Like, give yourself a break. And that for me is just like, that helps to kind of just take me back a notch and say, if I'm stressed out, if I'm upset, like what can I say to myself? And that's helpful for me. So hopefully maybe you found something that you can kind of come back to when you're feeling like, okay, like I'm struggling. What do I say to myself? Now, what we're kind of just talking in general about is emotional well-being. But I want to share something with you that's by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Alardi. And you may have seen some of these things before. So Dr. Alardi is from KU Med Center, and he wrote a book called The Depression Cure. Now, I will say, every time I sort of bring this up, I always want to make sure that I have a caveat. We're not saying that we're not advocating against medication, and we're not saying that, is something that you can absolutely cure always. But what I think is important for us to think about is there are some things that he mentions that are really important in our just sort of daily basic lives that maybe we have or have not incorporated into our life that can make a tremendous difference. One of the classes that we offer here at the church is called Live Well, and it's based on Dr. Alardi's book. So if you happen to know somebody, or you yourself are somebody who has struggled with anxiety or has struggled and battled depression, it's a really great class, and they walk in a lot more depth into why these things matter. But I just kind of wanted to walk through some of them with you now, as no matter how, it's sort of like one of those things where if you're at this level, it can help just sort of bump you up a little bit, And so it may not, if you have clinical depression and are really struggling, it may not be able to bring your level up as high as you need it to be. So obviously medication's important. But it might be one of those things that if you're struggling, you just add up some of these things in and it can make a big difference. So the first is omega-3 fatty acids. And has to do because the brain really needs these to function well. And across the globe, he says, there are countries with the highest level of omega-3 consumption have typically the lowest rates of depression, which I think is a pretty fascinating thing. There have been lots of research that's been done on these, and you can take fish oil or omega-3s, like you can get them at the store, you can buy them anywhere, but that's kind of, that's something you can do, or you can try and eat more of omega-3 fatty acids, which I think is walnuts and salmon and things of that nature. The second is an engaged activity. And this is just finding a way to use our mind. This is, if you like crossword puzzles, if you like to color, it can be whatever you want it to be. It can be knitting, whatever it is that you're doing that you would say, I'm going to engage my mind, And some of that is not allowing your mind to completely go blank, which is fine sometimes, but just 10 minutes a day of a really engaged activity can make a big difference. Physical activity. Now, we talked about this. When we think about what it means to be healthy, physical exercise makes a tremendous difference. It helps to raise endorphins in our bodies, and it helps us, even if you say, okay, I can't do 45 minutes or an hour or something. If I can get a 10-minute walk in 3 times a day, or 30 minutes, a few times a week, whatever that might be, it will make a big difference. The fourth is sunlight exposure, and especially when things are really gray outside. So there's something called seasonal affective disorder, and when it's really gray outside, it has an ability to just kind of just sort of lowers us a little bit, and we can feel a little bit more melancholy. And they have these light boxes. I don't know if anyone has ever purchased one or used one that's like the brightness of light, being exposed to light. And so if you have an ability in your workday or in your life, whatever it might be, to just take a walk outside, or if you can't, if you're sort of cooped up in an office or in a space that doesn't get a lot of sunlight, buy one of those light boxes and just like allow it to kind of soak and pour into you. When we lived in Michigan, I think it was one of the reasons I didn't like living in Michigan, because it was gray a lot of the time. And I actually bought one of these light boxes for myself because I could recognize that, probably 5 months of gray, when I was used to being in Louisiana where it was sunny and hot all the time, that it really affected how I was feeling. And so I recognized that. The fifth thing is social support. And that looks like, who are the people in my life that I can call on? Part of why I think maybe you're here tonight is that you want to be around other people. You want to connect with others, and hopefully you've made some connections, and you may know some other folks, but saying, who are the people in my life that I can call when the rails are falling off? Who can I call when I just need somebody to talk to? And making sure that you have people around you that can connect with you. And the last is sleep. So we're going to talk more about this in just a moment as we get into the physical aspect of what it means to care for ourselves. But sleep is a really, really important thing. So we're going to talk about it in just a minute. But as we're moving on, I want us to think about what are the things that we know that can help us physically. So I'm going to focus on these three things, and there are lots of things. I am not a physician, and I am not a nutritionist, and I am not a personal trainer, but I can just sort of like tell you some things that I know in general about these things, and then I'm going to kind of focus on some specific. I'm going to really kind of focus on sleep because I think that's one that we tend to really overlook. So the first is nutrition, and this is the idea that food is fuel. Now, I know about myself that sometimes when I'm really hungry, I'm just going to eat whatever is convenient. Whatever I can grab easiest is going to be what I eat. And I also know that I love sugar, but sugar makes my body crash. So if I eat too much sugar, then I'm tired. So if I look at my body and say, okay, how might I fuel my body instead of just trying to like shove food into my mouth and surround myself with things that might be healthy? And that looks like having easy snacks readily available, or whatever you may be putting on your counter, some fruit so that you can easily grab something, whatever that might be. The second thing on there when it pertains to nutrition is something called intuitive eating. And this is something that I learned about, I think it was maybe a year or two ago. And a friend of mine had posted something on her Facebook page. And she was recovering from an eating disorder. And she shared on her Facebook about the importance of intuitive eating. And I'd never heard of this statement before. I didn't know anything about it. And I was just like, okay, well, I'm going to look into what this is. And it changed my life. So I rarely say things change my life, but this truly changed my life. So I'm just sharing it with you because maybe you're like me, and this has been something that you've struggled with. So I'll just share with you how it's helped me. The idea and the principle behind this is that we have sort of desensitized our ability to know when we're hungry and when we're full. And we tend to sort of have maybe an unrealistic expectation about, I think females in particular, about how much we should eat and how much we shouldn't eat. And I was the kind of person that would count my calories. I had an app on my phone. That was the healthy thing to do, all these sorts of things. But what I was realizing is that there were, on the days that I would eat not enough during the day, by the time the evening came, I was ravenous. And like I couldn't get enough food. And so I just would overeat and eat the bad things because I was so hungry and I just like couldn't sustain myself. Or there were some days that I was just really hungry. Maybe I hadn't exercised that morning, but for some reason, like I was really hungry and I'd feel bad about it all day. And then there were other days that I wasn't that hungry and I would say, no, I've got to eat. And I just kind of began, there's a book on it and I read it, and there are lots of sort of principles to it. I mean, and what it's saying is you want to eat healthy things, but you're also saying, I'm not going to try and stop myself from enjoying things that I might like to enjoy. And over the course of doing this intuitive eating, and I lost weight, which seemed crazy because I was not stopping myself from eating whatever I wanted, which I thought was fascinating. And I was happier than I'd ever been, and I had a better relationship with food. I was sitting with some ladies tonight, and they're like, is that all you're eating for dinner? And I was like, well, it's because I was really hungry earlier, and so I ate when I was hungry, and then by the time I got here, I knew I needed a little something more, but I didn't have to feel like I had to fill my plate with a bunch of food in order to eat. So I'm just, like I said, I'm sharing that with you because it has been really freeing for me, and I don't think that I had an eating disorder per se, but I think I had an unhealthy association with food. And I was really kind of focusing too much on maybe the things that I shouldn't have been focusing on rather than the things that I should. And say, okay, food is here to help us. It's here to fuel us. And there are some days that we need more fuel than others. And listening to what my body needs so that I can perform to my best ability. The second thing is being active. So I put here, find something that you enjoy doing. If your best friend loves yoga but you hate it, like give it a try, but don't keep forcing yourself to do something that you hate. If you don't like running and you've tried running, then okay, that's okay. But if it's something that you love, then you're much more likely to be able to do it. I also think that if you can pair it with a friend, then you're even better. Like I love running, but I love running so much and because I get to do it with friends. I'm not running right now because I'm pregnant and it's too uncomfortable to run. But I have friends that I meet with to walk. And it's sort of, for me, it's a win-win. I get to connect with them, I get to catch up with them, and I get to go for a walk. The other thing that I like to do is I go to spin classes. And the reason I go to spin classes is because the room is really dark. And nobody sees me when I look like an idiot. So, I enjoy going because I'm not comparing myself to anybody else. And I can sit on the back row, and I can listen to good music, and I can sweat and not feel badly about myself. So that's what I enjoy doing. The second element of that is to set a schedule and stay consistent. My husband and I, if I'm going to go to the gym, it's going to have to be early in the morning. But our son is up at usually 5 a.m., so trying to navigate who gets to sleep in is like, if I'm going to the gym every morning and he's getting up at 5 a.m., he's like, that's not very fair. So we try and kind of make a schedule to where I know, okay, Tuesdays and Thursdays are the mornings that I can work out early, and then Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm up early with Fred, and he can sleep in, and then I go on Friday and Saturday as well. But find a schedule that works for you and that you can stick with. The last thing is sleep. So I think I just want us to have some time to connect at our tables for about 4 minutes about sleep. So I want you to think through these questions and really kind of work through them. Do you go to bed at the same time and get up in the morning at the same time? Do you need caffeine to get through the day? Whatever that looks like. So talk amongst your tables, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about what are some of the steps that you can do to incorporate sleep into your day. So share amongst yourselves, and then I'll call you back together. So when we think about our sleep, I know it's one of those things that we can often just kind of take for granted, but when we are sleep deprived, it is not a healthy thing. And I think that we live in I know we've talked in the past couple times, we talked about hurry and being rushed, and we're going to talk about what happens when we put too much on ourselves, when we're trying to do things and we don't have the capacity to do them. Sometimes the best thing that we can do is just sleep. If we find that it's taking us too long to get a task done, it's probably because maybe we're a little bit too tired. And then when I first came to Resurrection, I can remember I was trying to get used to a new schedule, and I had a commute, and I remember there were days that some days I would just open up my email and I'd be trying to send an email, and it would take me 5 minutes to just kind of process what I needed to say, and I was like, okay, I'm too tired. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to deal with this tomorrow. If you find that you're too tired to do something, sleep. Give yourself the gift of sleep. So I've been going through this book several times, The Good and Beautiful God, and one of the things that he suggested as a soul training, which kind of what we've talked about, is this idea of sleep. And what he said in his book is he said that the number one exhaustion and living beyond what we have the capacity to do is the number one energy suck from getting spiritually connected. Because when we are overextended and when we're tired, it's like we just don't have the time to be able to do the things that we know that we need to do. And it feels like it's not something that we have the luxury of doing, but sleep was created for a reason. And just neurologically, when we sleep, we help to purge our brains of the toxins that are in our brains, and we feel better the next day. And so trying to make sure that you make this a part of your life. So try and sleep at a consistent time each night. If you have an iPhone, you can actually set an alarm on your phone. It's a bedtime alarm. So it's the same, it's like sort of a different philosophy of if I'm going to get up at 5 a.m., what time do I need to go to sleep in order to get 7 hours of sleep? And it will like ring an alarm and let you know, oh, hey, it's time for bed, and kind of give you a little warning to get to bed. So I encourage you to do that. Try not to engage in activities that increase stress right before bedtime. So are there things that, maybe you don't want to watch the really scary movie that's going to stress you out? Like are there things that are going to get you really amped up? I know that when I come home from teaching, I'm really excited. I'm an extrovert. I love being around people. And I get home, and Scott's like, okay, I'm tired. And usually I'm tired. I'm like, okay, it's time for bed. And he's like, why are you so awake? And I'm like, because I've been teaching, and I'm talking to all these people. Like, I'm not ready for bed yet. I need to wind down. So whatever that thing is for you, making sure that you give yourself some time to sort of not do that. The third, if you're affected by stimulants, avoid them in the evening. And the thing to remember about something like a cup of coffee is that it also has a half-life. So even though you drank a cup of coffee and you don't think it's going to affect you, it will affect you. I found that for me, if I drank coffee after 2 p.m., I could fall asleep because I was tired, but I would wake up in the middle of the night and couldn't fall back asleep. And so I told myself, okay, after 2 p.m., I switched to decaf. And I was like, I'm getting old. But it made a huge difference. It made a huge difference. If spicy foods affect you, if you're somebody who gets heartburn, whatever that might be, just try and take those. If you're not tired, it's important for you to recognize this too. Like, you can't also force yourself to be tired. So if you're not tired, what are some rituals and things that you can do to kind of get yourself prepared to be tired? So maybe you do some reading, you turn off the TV, you pray, you take a hot shower, a hot bath, something that you feel like would relax you. Turn the lights down low in your home, whatever that might be, and relax kind of until you feel drowsy. I know a physician friend of mine also said that if you wake up in the middle of the night, try and stay in bed and give yourself about 20 minutes to fall back asleep. But if you can't, then get up and try and do something that will help you fall back asleep. Because and this is really, and I thought, oh, that's not going to work, but it did. Now, that does not mean perusing Facebook. That is the worst thing to do, because once you open up your phone, you are opening your self up to a light that's going to wake you up. So don't pull out your phone. Don't try and resist the temptation. But if you go into the other room and you start reading in a low light, you will find eventually you're going to get tired again. And there were times that I know I would toss and turn for 2 hours. And if I would have just gotten up and maybe read for 20 minutes, I would have been fine and been able to go back to sleep. So just really kind of try and think, and maybe give yourself a goal. So next week, this week, sometime, I'm going to get however many hours of sleep it is that you need. I feel like for me, 7 hours is a good amount. Some people need more. Some people need less. And it might mean that you need to just kind of continue to just allow yourself to sleep to get a better sense for what that looks like. And maybe if you have the ability to do it, say, okay, I'm going to go to sleep when I'm tired, and I'm going to wake up when I'm awake. Now, that may not always be a luxury that you have, but if you can do that consistently over an amount of time, and you can monitor it and say, okay, what's my ideal amount of time of sleep? And then kind of sort of set the clock back for what you need. The reason I also want to bring this idea in is sleep is also kind of connected with rest and the importance of giving ourselves moments to reconnect. And so this is from Genesis, and it says, on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. And I can't stress this enough. Give yourself some time just to step away from all the other things. Just give yourself a moment to be able to step away. Last night, I was teaching at the Jewish community services. They have a group of volunteer care ministers, like we do here at our church, and I connected with their rabbi, and he said, I'd love for you to come and talk with them about prayer. And And I was talking with them a little bit about what they do. And one of the things they do is they share. One of the women says she brings Shabbat boxes to people in the care homes who can't get out, and so that they can experience the Sabbath. So for those who are Jewish, it begins at sundown on Friday evening, and it goes through sundown on Saturday evening. And we have dear friends who are Jewish, and they really try their very best. They don't always do it exactly, but they try their very best to really honor that. And it's something that I really appreciate. As a pastor, I work on Sundays, so that's not my Sabbath. My Sabbath is Friday. And when we think about what can we do in order to really give ourselves some moments to kind of rest, there are a few things I would suggest. The first is refraining from work. If you cannot open up your emails, because the truth is, if you're like me, if you open up an email, you can't unread it. You can't forget that you read it. If someone's upset about something, or there's something that happened, or you forgot something, your mind is automatically transported. The second thing you can do is to spend time with your loved ones. If there's a friend that you've really wanted to be meeting up with, do it. Say, hey, let's grab coffee. Let's go for a walk. Let's spend time with your kids. Spend time with a friend, whoever that might be. And the last is really be intentional about taking this opportunity to connect with God. So how can you really look at your day to say, what might a day that's full of things that I don't have to do, what might that look like? So last Friday was a snow day for my son and his school. School was closed down, and I was like, okay, well, that means I can't run all the errands that I thought I was going to. So we're just going to hang out at home. And I found just such a sense of a snow day saying you can't run to 10 different stores or do all these things that you think you needed to do, and just give myself a moment to just stay home and rest. And I felt so much more refreshed. So I encourage you to, if you can't give yourself a whole day, give yourself part of a day. Give yourself just a little bit of time to say, okay, what can I do to help myself feel refreshed? So the last thing we're going to talk about is spiritual. And we've been talking and having some spiritual kind of practices, but I want us to think about what kind of a spiritual connection we have, and I'm going to relate it to, I'm going to talk about the idea of fear and then peace. So I'll explain it as I'm kind of getting into this. So as we've been talking about what are the changes that I want to make in my life, how do I want to live my life different? Sometimes we are frozen by our fears. And I put down there 3, and we're going to talk through these specific kinds of fears and do some work on those. The first is fear of rejection. The second is a fear of failure. And the third is the fear of the unknown. So I know there are lots of things that we can be fearful from, but these are some that I think is a helpful thing for us to kind of imagine. And rather than saying, I'm going to be fearful of these things, the idea of peaceful perseverance. So a purposeful opportunity to let go. So rather than sort of say, I'm sort of stuck, I can't do anything, I can't make any changes, how might we instead let go, literally let go, and that can offer to us a sense of peace. So when we think about the first, the idea of being afraid of rejection, how might we instead say, what might God have a promise for me? I've got a psalm. I'm going to skip past something and read this next psalm. And so this is Psalm 139. It says, I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. And it's one of the most beautiful psalms, and I just love it. And there's this sense of I am created by God. God has a promise for me. God loves me deeply. God cares me, knows me intimately. And rather than try and be afraid of being rejected, knowing in that sense of God's always going to love me. God's always going to be there with me, and sort of holding on close to that. I was watching a TED Talk recently, and it's by this guy. I'm going to mispronounce his name, but it's Jia Jiang, and you can look him up if you'd like. But he did this thing where for 100 days, he did 100 days of rejection. So he was trying to desensitize himself from rejection because he really struggled with rejection. And he said because what he was finding is that if he wanted to do something, he oftentimes wouldn't do it just because he was afraid that somebody would reject him. So he has 100 things that he did. He did the most random things. He pulled up in front of somebody's house, and they were having a Super Bowl party, and asked if he could join their party. And they said no. Okay. And he randomly asked someone on the street if they would give him a $100 bill, and they said no. But he did do some things where people ironically said yes. So he knocked on somebody's door and he said, "Can I play soccer in your backyard?" And they said, "Sure." So a random stranger let him play soccer in their backyard. He asked a police officer, "Can I sit in the front seat of your car and pretend like I'm driving the car?" And the police officer said, "Sure, why not?" And what he found is he had 100 days of things that he wanted to do. Of those, when he asked the most random things like that, he got 51 no's and 49 yeses. So when he started thinking through these things, I'm going to read number 2. Rejection is a numbers game. He said, there were things that I never could have imagined that people would have actually said yes to, but they did. Maybe they just felt awkward. I don't know. But they said yes to him because he asked the question. And the more that he got rejected, the more he was like, well, that's okay. I've got another opportunity the next day. So we talked about this idea of handling rejection as a muscle, and avoiding rejection doesn't mean that you avoid failure. So we can try and force ourselves to say, well, I don't really want to, I'm nervous about, I don't want to be rejected. I don't want somebody to think, to do something that would make me feel badly. So I want you to just kind of talk at your tables just for 2 minutes, have a conversation. Like if there was something really random that you would ask somebody to do, what would it be? And how would it, I don't know, like maybe come up with your own sort of random thing that you're going to ask somebody, and how you might stop yourself, from feeling like being afraid of rejection. So share amongst your tables, and then I'll gather you back together. All right. I just kind of, when I was reading through all these things this guy did, and I thought, gosh, like sometimes just sort of forcing ourselves to ask the question, not knowing whether it's going to be a yes or no, is a helpful way for us to just sort of go out on a limb and make sure that we're trying to do something different and kind of helping ourselves not to be so stressed about it. Sorry, my clicker's not working. Got it? Oh, am I not looking it up? Oh, there it is. Or is it? Oh. Sorry, I moved too fast. All right, so the next thing that I want us to think about is this idea of failure. And how many of us like to fail? None of us. None of us really like to fail. However, if we are not having failure, that means maybe we're not experiencing enough new things. I don't like it, but it's one of the most important things that I think we can do is force ourselves to say, okay, I'm not going to get it right all the time. We were talking in our staff meeting just this week, and we were doing as a staff, we're talking about what our strengths are. And one of the strengths that I don't have, but is my husband has, is competition. And I told him, I was like, well, I'm not competitive. I'm only competitive when I'm good at something, because if I'm not good at something, I don't really care. I'm like, whatever, because I'm not necessarily going to try and push myself, because if I'm not good at it, then I'm like, oh, it's no big deal. I'm not good at that. I don't really want to sort of try and push myself and grow in that capacity, because maybe I'm going to fail. But the reality is we are all going to fail. And we have sort of 2 ways to look at it. We can look at it as I'm failure. This kind of gets back to some of the self-compassion, self-talk stuff. I can feel bad about myself and say, I made a mistake. I'm bad. I did something bad. I'm bad. Or we can say, you know what? I messed up. And what can I learn from this? So a year and a half ago, I took a new job, and I lead our congregational care department and have for the past year and a half. And I made a lot of mistakes in that first year. And I knew that I was going to, but they were really painful. And so I have this little note section in my phone, and I have this little list that says things that I've learned. And I will tell you, it was really painful to kind of come through some things, but to do so and be able to look back and say, okay, I learned something in that. So I learned to over communicate, which I'm still not great at. And I'm like, okay, maybe I need to be reading back over some of these things that I'm looking over, and to talk to people about big things that are coming up. Again, the communication piece. There were several other things that I wrote down in here, and I thought, okay, I can talk about all the mistakes that I made, or I can couch it in a way to say, what did I learn from it? How might I say, well, I'm not going to do that again? And there's something really true to that. When I make a mistake, when I feel like I've failed, it's okay because it's taught me something really important. And I'm going to look at the situation in a much different way next time because I don't want that to happen again. So the next exercise that I want us to do and to share in conversation, I'm going to give you about 7 minutes to do this. And I want you to think about a recent failure you've had. And then, now you don't have to share all of this with the people around you because sometimes it can be a little sensitive to share a failure you had. But I want you to name 3 reasons why you're grateful for it, including what you learned from it, and what you will do differently the next time. So I'll give you about 4 minutes to do that. And then, this is the fun part, find somebody famous that you respect or admire and Google them and write down a failure they experienced. So no, you're not the only one. So think about somebody that you admire. What kind of failure did they have? And then that's what you can have an opportunity to share with those at your table. So I'll give you 7 minutes to talk about a failure you had, what you'll do differently, and then somebody famous that you admire that also failed, and talk about it. All right, friends. Hopefully you were able to open up yourself and say, okay, here's where I had a failure, and that you learned something from it. I think there's always something that we can learn from the failures that we have. And anybody find a really fun failure that one of the famous people that they have had? Anybody find something really fun or interesting? No, maybe you didn't do it. Okay, well, do it. So eventually, go Google somebody, and you will learn that everybody has failure, at least just kind of a fun thing to remind ourselves and think about. So I Googled Oprah and found that she had this big flop in a movie, and she learned lots of things. She wrote a whole article about it, about how she learned lots of things about not to put all her eggs in one basket and lots of other things. So it's like, okay, yes, even Oprah Winfrey can have a movie that fails, even though it seems like everything she picks seems to be great. So the last thing for us to talk about as it pertains to fear is the fear of the unknown versus possibilities. So we sometimes don't know, we never really know. We can try and plan every single moment of every single day and have really big dreams and visions for what things are going to be, but we don't really know what's going to happen. And sometimes that fear of what might happen and not knowing what's going to happen can be really overwhelming for us. So rather than say, I'm afraid of what I don't know, I'm afraid of doing something new and different, instead think about what might the possibilities be. So one of my favorite passages is from Ephesians, and it says this: "Now to him who by the power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly far more than all we can ask or imagine. To him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever." And so this sense of God can see beyond what we can see. And if we allow ourselves to even begin to open our heads and our hearts up to what the possibilities might be, that God can do something truly transformational in our lives. So want to encourage you to just kind of think maybe just a little bit bigger and open to what that might be. Now, we don't have time to practice this, but this is from many years ago. I was preaching here at Resurrection, and this is a sort of certain condensed version of something called the Prayer of Examen. And the Prayer of Examen was by St. Ignatius. And it's just a way to take a look at, okay, let me round out and kind of take a look at the end of my day. And so the questions are, it's sort of a prayer that's designed to, number one, whose am I? So I belong to God. What did I do today? And we've talked about gratitude and other capacities, and to be able to say, what are the things that I did today? And it's really kind of giving a chance to say, what are the things that I did? Why did I feel grateful? What did these things mean in my life? When did I feel most alive? Now, that's one of my very favorite questions, is this sense of when was you remember the very first week when we talked? And we were talking about what sparks joy in you, and kind of thinking through some of those things. When did I feel most alive? And then the next question is, where am I going? So all those kind of things, you're thinking back about the day, but you're kind of dreaming into the future a little bit. So imagining the possibilities, that's where this kind of comes in, this sense of, okay, where am I going? God, what do you have in store for me? How can I let go of my worries, my fears, my concerns, my fear of the unknown, and say, God, what might be possible for me? And then the last is why. Why does this matter to me? And why do I have hope? Why do I have faith? What can I do? What can I hold on to? And if at the end of every day, even if you just ask a few of these questions and you're spending time in prayer, you're connecting with your loved ones and kind of thinking and processing through these things, what it can help you do is to reframe the end of your day and help you prepare for what's next to come. Because again, we don't always know what's going to happen, but if we allow ourselves to trust that, okay, God is so much bigger, and even all these things that I've gone through, the really hard things, the really good things, God is with me in the midst of them all. So I'll just kind of recap a few things as we reflect. We can transform our thoughts into those of compassion. So again, we can change what we're thinking and how we're thinking, and we are not alone. Others feel this way. I love that sense of like, okay, I'm not the only one. Caring for our bodies through good food, activity, and sleep is essential for our well-being. And a life of peace and a spiritual connection is attainable. So just knowing like, I can do this. I can find opportunities to feel peace rather than sort of fall into fear. And just an encouragement to take time to reflect each and every day. So I know I sort of like zoomed through lots of things today, and we've had 3 weeks of being able to walk through these things, and I hope that you have found that it has been encouraging and that you've found some things that you can add into your life and ways to really reflect on who you are and finding depth and energy and excitement in what 2020 will bring. So just a couple of words of instruction to bring your notebooks to the back and throw away your trash, and next week we have our all-church gathering. But I just want to say thank you so much for spending your time with me and listening and sharing and connecting with one another, and for making a commitment to say, I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to change, and I want to live my very best life that I possibly can. So thank you, and yay to you. Yay! So I know that we have to send folks out to pick up kids, and we are ending the evening, but I would love to say a prayer with you before you go. So let us pray. God, I give you thanks for this incredible group of people who have made a commitment to transform their lives. Sometimes we feel like we don't know where to start, and so we just start one little step at a time. And one moment, one day, one connection, one opportunity at a time, God, we can find that you work in and through us in a beautiful way. Help us to be mindful of ways that we can add value to our life and let go of the things that don't bring us joy, and really begin to evaluate who we want to be, how we want to live our life, and what we might do that those small changes can make a tremendous difference. Send us forth knowing that you believe in us more than we could ever believe in ourselves, and that just to give us the courage to trust in you. All this we pray in Christ's name. Amen.